The moment Laura sensed something was different came not from words, but from silence, the kind that presses softly but firmly against the walls of a home. The afternoon light slipped through the kitchen window, resting on the wooden table where Ethan sat alone, his posture stiff, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if it held answers he was afraid to lift. The house was usually alive when Daniel brought friends over, laughter, teasing, footsteps, but now there was a pause that felt heavy, like the calm before a truth finally chose to surface. Laura moved about the kitchen with quiet purpose, placing a kettle on the stove, giving Ethan space without leaving him alone. She had learned over years of motherhood that young people often needed time more than questions. Ethan's hands were folded tightly, his thumb rubbing against his knuckle again and again, a small nervous habit that betrayed the calm he was trying to show. When Daniel called from upstairs that he had forgotten his jacket, Ethan barely reacted, only nodded as if he hadn't fully heard. Laura noticed everything, the way his shoulders rose with each breath, the way he avoided eye contact, the way his jaw tightened when the silence stretched too long. She poured tea and set a cup in front of him, the soft clink of porcelain sounding louder than it should have. Ethan glanced at it, whispered a thank you, then returned his gaze to the floor. Laura sat across from him, not too close, not too far, sensing that whatever lived inside him had been carried for a long time, and was now growing too heavy to hold. She spoke gently, asking if he was all right, expecting the usual polite answer, but instead she saw his mask crack just slightly. He nodded, then stopped, shook his head, and let out a breath that sounded like surrender. He said he needed to say something, that he was afraid he might not be able to if he waited any longer. The words were simple, but the weight behind them filled the room. Laura felt her heart tighten, not with fear, but with care. She remembered moments from her own past when words had waited at the edge of her mouth, moments when courage felt like stepping into cold water without knowing how deep it was. Ethan swallowed, his voice low but steady as he began to speak, explaining that he had always felt safe in this house, that being here made him feel seen even when he said nothing at all. He talked quickly now, as if afraid the chance might slip away, admitting that lately the visits had meant more than just spending time with Daniel. Laura listened closely, not interrupting, understanding that this was not a confession meant to shock, but one meant to be understood. Ethan's voice trembled as he admitted he was confused, that feelings had grown quietly, without permission, and now stood in front of him demanding honesty. He did not name those feelings yet, but Laura already sensed their shape. She saw the vulnerability in him, the careful way he chose each word, the respect he carried even in his fear. The kettle clicked off in the background, unnoticed. Ethan finally paused, his breath shallow, his eyes still locked on the floor, as if lifting them might make the truth too real. Laura realized that this moment, this simple kitchen, this quiet afternoon, would stay with him for years. She leaned forward slightly, offering presence rather than advice, knowing that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was speak while still afraid. And as Ethan gathered himself to continue, Laura understood that whatever he was about to say would change something, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in the quiet, lasting way that real feelings always do. Ethan's voice grew steadier once he began, as if speaking the truth gave him strength he did not know he had, and he told Laura that he had carried these feelings for months, hiding them behind jokes, school talk, and casual visits that meant far more to him than he ever admitted. He explained how at first he came over just to see Daniel, how the house felt warm and familiar, but slowly his attention began to shift in ways he did not expect or plan. He spoke about noticing small things, the way Emily listened when others talked, the calm in her voice, the kindness in her actions, and how those moments stayed with him long after he went home. He admitted he tried to ignore it, telling himself it was nothing, that it would fade, but instead it grew quietly, becoming something real and deeply personal. His words moved faster now, not rushed but urgent, as if he feared being misunderstood. He said he never meant to cross any lines, never wanted to cause discomfort or trouble, and that respect mattered to him more than his own feelings. Laura watched him closely, seeing not recklessness but care, not impulse but thought. Ethan confessed that some days he felt hopeful, imagining what it would be like to be honest, while other days he felt ashamed for feeling anything at all. He described the struggle of sitting at the same table, laughing with everyone, while holding a secret that made his chest feel tight. He said he worried about losing Daniel's friendship, about changing how Emily saw him, about being judged for something he never chose, but could no longer deny. Laura remained quiet, letting the words fall freely, understanding that he needed release more than reassurance in that moment. Ethan paused briefly, then continued, saying that what frightened him most was not rejection but silence, the idea of never knowing, of letting fear decide for him. His hands shook slightly as he admitted that every visit made it harder to pretend, that each kind word from Emily felt both comforting and painful. He said he knew feelings alone did not demand answers, but honesty demanded courage. The room felt full, not of tension, but of truth finally allowed space. Laura saw the careful balance in him, the desire to do right, while still being true to himself, and she felt a quiet respect grow inside her. Ethan ended his confession not with a request, but with uncertainty, saying he did not know what he should do next, only that holding everything inside had become impossible. His voice softened as he finished, eyes still lowered, waiting not for approval, but for understanding, and in that pause, Laura realized this was not a moment of drama, but one of emotional growth, where a young man learned that feelings spoken with honesty could be carried with dignity. Laura did not answer right away, and that silence was kind, not heavy, giving Ethan space to breathe after releasing a truth that had lived inside him for too long. She studied his face, the mix of worry and hope, and chose her words with care, knowing that advice given in moments like this could shape how someone remembered their first real emotional risk. She told him that feelings did not appear without reason, and that having them did not mean he had done anything wrong. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of quiet understanding. Ethan listened closely as she explained that growing up meant learning how to hold emotions without letting them control or silence him. She reminded him that respect was already present in the way he spoke, in how deeply he considered the people he cared about, and that this alone showed maturity. Ethan's shoulders slowly relaxed as he absorbed her words, as if the weight he carried had shifted into something lighter. Laura shared that fear was natural when something mattered, that uncertainty was often the sign of something meaningful rather than something dangerous. She encouraged him not to rush toward answers, but also not to run from his own truth. The goal, she said, was not to force a moment, but to be honest when the time felt right. Ethan nodded, his eyes clearer now, his breathing more even, as if her words had given him permission to exist as he was. Laura spoke about how unspoken feelings could quietly shape behavior, creating distance or confusion, and how gentle honesty could prevent regret later in life. She did not promise that everything would turn out perfectly, but she reminded him that courage was measured by intention, not outcome. As they talked, footsteps echoed from upstairs, Daniel's voice calling out casually, unaware of the emotional shift happening below. The sound grounded the moment, reminding Ethan that life continued even in the middle of uncertainty. Laura smiled slightly, telling him that whatever choice he made should come from calm, not fear, and that he did not have to decide everything at once. Ethan thanked her, his voice steady, gratitude clear in his expression. In that moment, he felt seen not as a problem or a risk, but as a young man learning how to navigate feelings with care. The conversation had not solved everything, but it had changed something important inside him. As the noise of the house returned, Ethan realized that speaking had not weakened him, but strengthened him, and that sometimes guidance did not come in grand speeches, but in quiet reassurance that allowed a person to trust themselves again. The house felt different after Ethan left, not louder or quieter, but fuller, as if something unseen now lived in the spaces between rooms, and Laura stood by the kitchen window watching his figure fade down the street, thinking about how a single honest moment could shift the air of an entire day. She moved slowly, washing the unused cup, wiping the counter, letting her thoughts settle, aware that what had happened was not dramatic on the surface, but meaningful in ways that lingered. Upstairs, Daniel laughed at something on his phone, unaware that his best friend had just crossed an invisible line from boyhood into emotional adulthood, and Emily's soft music drifted down the hall, ordinary sounds that felt newly important. Laura leaned against the counter and reflected on how love often arrived quietly, without permission, and how the first test was never about being returned, but about being brave enough to admit it existed. She felt proud of Ethan, not because of who he cared about, but because of how carefully he carried that care. She also felt protective, knowing that the next steps, whatever they were, would belong to him alone. Later that evening, as dinner came together and the family gathered, Laura watched Ethan's absence leave a gentle outline behind, like a story paused mid-sentence. She noticed Emily's smile when Daniel mentioned Ethan might come by later in the week, a small, unguarded expression that suggested possibilities without defining them. Laura said nothing, understanding that some things needed time more than guidance. As night settled in and the house grew quiet again, she sat alone with her thoughts, remembering her own past moments of longing and the choices that had shaped her life. She understood now that what made those memories powerful was not whether love had lasted, but that it had been real and honored. Somewhere across town, Ethan lay awake, replaying the conversation, feeling lighter yet unsure, knowing that the truth had changed him even if nothing else had changed yet. He felt a calm he had not known before, the peace that came from no longer hiding from himself. Laura hoped that whatever path unfolded, it would teach him that respect and honesty were never wasted, even when outcomes were uncertain. As she turned off the lights and headed upstairs, she carried a quiet certainty with her, the knowledge that emotional courage often went unseen, but it always mattered. The truth Ethan shared did not demand an ending or a beginning, only acknowledgement, and that alone was enough to mark the moment as important. In the gentle stillness of the night, life moved forward, unchanged on the surface, but deeper beneath, where feelings lived, grew, and waited for the right time to be understood.